I'll use a metaphor so people understand it. And first of all, I want to make sure people understand that I wouldn't have a career if it weren't for the people who coined the term emotional intelligence. They made it socially acceptable to talk about emotions, but um, emotional intelligence does not give you emotional intelligence. It doesn't give you any emotional abilities. And here's the way I like to describe the difference between that and emotional authenticity. Have you ever built a puzzle?
I put together a puzzle.
Sure.
Yeah.
What's the first thing you start with?
The outline,
Yeah, why is that?
the edges, because you can see those first.
Yeah, it's simple, doesn't require much effort, but does that, if you just built the edges of if this were a puzzle and you just built the edges, because what happens once you build the edges? Don't you usually do what?
Well, then you start looking for other patterns, I think.
But you quit, right? Because it's like,
Well, it gets harder for sure.
yeah,
Yeah.
it gets
Yeah.
harder and you get frustrated and then it's like, well, let's go get something to eat instead. Like,
Lots of
well,
breaks.
yeah, emotional intelligence gives you the border. Emotional authenticity gives you a process that's like putting the pieces of the border together so you can complete the picture.
Ah.
That's the difference between them. And it starts, see, like emotional intelligence doesn't even tell you. First of all, their whole process is built off a design of the brain, which was disproven before the book was ever written. All right, the old triune brain model, that's not how the brain works. And again, it was disproven before they ever wrote the books. The other thing is they lightly suggest that when you have an emotional reaction, maybe it's something your sister said when you're a kid. Well, every single emotion you ever have, no matter what age you are, all you're ever doing is reliving an emotion that you learned in childhood. We're not born with emotions. We learn them. We develop what are called simulations, concepts, and definitions. And so whether you're happy or sad as an adult, you're not present in that moment. You're reliving a childhood emotion that you lived in, that you experienced in the past. And so depending on the simulation, concept, and definition, you're stuck reliving the trauma. And so you have to learn the process. Well, again, emotional intelligence doesn't teach you this, that it's very simple. And this is the beginning steps of learning emotional authenticity is 3 simple questions. What am I feeling? I have a free feelings wheel you can download on my website. And so most people, because 70% of the population is detached from their emotions, they start in the beginning, which is bad, angry, sad, happy, but as you get further on the wheel, they get more intricate and more defined. And as you get better at it, you'll need a thesaurus because there are thousands of emotional words, but most people start in the beginning. So here's an example. Let's see if I can do this. I'll tell you the story. I was driving my car, and this helped me discover how denial works too. And I was stuck behind a guy who wouldn't turn left. We're in the left-hand turn lane, and he wouldn't turn. And I'm screaming and yelling at him because he should have turned. And I know that my judgment, blame, and criticism about him and his driving is about me in an area of myself I haven't reconciled. So I ask myself, what am I feeling? I'm feeling angry, powerless, invisible, ignored, neglected. And then I asked, okay, of all those feelings, which one is the most powerful? Powerless. Okay. Question number 2 is, where in my body am I feeling it? Well, for me, that's almost always in my stomach. What's my first memory of having this feeling? Well, that's very simple. The day I opened up the door to my mom and found her naked on the toilet. So in that moment, because I can't change him, and because I couldn't change my mom, I'm reliving the trauma from my childhood. Emotional intelligence doesn't even get you anywhere close to that understanding. And so if you don't know that when you're upset with your partner and 2 people are fighting, that you're both projecting pain from the past onto each other, that you're not even seeing your partner's face. And so when emotional intelligence talks about, relationship intelligence, you don't have it because they're not giving you the skills and tools. Now, there are many other tools to it. I have a whole university classes, written 2 books, like I can't give you all of it. But
Right.
that's just a little snippet to give hopefully the viewers an idea of, wow, that's different. And I can see how, yeah, all I have to do is those 3 questions and I can see immediately. Now, here's for some people go, yeah, but I don't remember my trauma as a childhood. That's fine. You don't need to. Every person will remember a certain age. God, yeah, I feel like I was about 3 or 5 years old, 8 years old. I don't know what happened, but something I feel I was about that age. That's good enough. If you're meant to recall the memory, you will. You don't have to. But that's the beginning process to start developing true emotional intelligence and how all of your so-called thoughts, beliefs, and actions are not thought-based, because that's not even how our brain works. Every bit of information we ever take in, whether we see it, touch it, smell it, taste it, it goes into the emotional center of our brain. It pulls on past emotional experiences. We feel something, it then triggers the thought, the simulation concept, and the definition, which are the words. And that's what gets you thinking. So if you can't sleep at night, all of these things, you're just processing big time pain from the past. And
Mhm.
until you know the process to find it, and that's why people are on sleeping pills, depression, all of these things is we don't teach, wait a minute, all of that is a result of unhealed pain in the past. And without emotional authenticity, you're destined to, stay stuck on medication or detach from yourself.
Kenny specializes in helping individuals and couples heal their past emotional pain to reclaim their authentic selves. He accomplishes this through his transformative emotional authenticity method. Kenny, welcome. I'm so glad you're here.
Thanks for having me, Pi. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah. I appreciate you joining us. And so I'm curious. I'd love if you would be willing just to share a little bit about yourself and what happened in your life that led you to do the work that you do in the world now.
Sure. Well, my parents were 16, 18 when they were married, 21 and 23 with 4 kids. My mom was adopted and sexually abused as a child, and my dad was beat to death. And so, just like everybody, they brought their trauma with them. Society has never really taught us really how to be a parent or how to deal with our pain. It's kind of changing now, finally. But I was 10 years old, woke up in the middle of the night, and that's when, just to use the restroom, and I opened up the door, and that's when I discovered my mom was an alcoholic. And, I talk about it in my first book, how, it was like Star Trek. I felt it starting in my feet and I was just screaming, I'm dying, I'm dying. Like I separated from myself at that point. And, our because we don't deal with these things, just like anybody else, I created adaptations. I struggled through multiple addictions. I married 2 narcissists. Well, the first one was borderline personality, narcissistic sociopath, and was physically and verbally abusive, went through a horrific child custody battle, like parental alienation, bankruptcy, I played 2 professional sports. I discovered I never wanted to play, and then married a second narcissist. And at about 21, I think was the first time I saw a counselor. I had an instinct that things just aren't right. And so I started looking for help at 20. Yeah, I was 21. And, but it wasn't until the divorce from my first wife that I finally found somebody qualified. And that's when I really started to learn and grow. But I hadn't gotten far enough. And so the divorce from the second wife, I spent 3 days holed up in my apartment contemplating suicide. I was writing my kids a note. It's actually in the email I sent to that therapist while I was in that period is in my first book. And I could write about all the pain I was in. That part was easy. What got me into trouble was when I tried to tell my kids why this was the best for all of us. But since I had been pursuing God, but at that time I was 47 or something. So I'd been pursuing recovery for almost 30 years. And so I knew too much psychology. Like every sentence, I'm like, that's codependence, that's transference. That, I could not shrink myself. And I realized I couldn't leave that on them, but I also couldn't live the way I was. And then it hit me. I've been chasing recovery for nearly 30 years, and I'm here. There's a terrible problem in the personal development psychology, psychiatry field. And so I went back in my office and I wrote down, I want to come up with groundbreaking processes that nobody else has ever discovered that'll fundamentally change the way we help people. And over the last 10 or so years, that's what I've done. I've discovered a lot of things, that I don't hear anybody else talking about, and they've had a dramatic impact on people's lives. And how I ended up here, it's funny, that counselor who I saw after my first divorce, or during my first divorce, I'd only been seeing him a couple months, and he's the one who put the seed in my head. I would also go to group, and the group was run by one of the counselors at his office. And, every time I'd show up for my appointment, he'd go, I heard about you. I heard about you. And so I'd only been seeing about I don't know, somewhere between 2 and 4 months. And I walked in his office and he just said, you have a gift, you need to come work for me. And, I just had an ability to my trauma taught me how to process things in a way that's different. And thank God I didn't start helping people back then. I had way too much recovery to do. But that planted the seed, and it just took me a long time to discover, wait a minute, all of these other things are adaptations. They're just it's what I call the worst day cycle. One of the processes I've discovered, we're just reliving and re-victimizing ourselves as adults. And that's all I was doing. And that's when I finally figured out, oh my God, this is actually, I was doing all of that. So one day I could arrive here, teach myself the way out of this, because I couldn't get over the hump. I had to figure it out myself.
Right.
And so now I, try and share that information with others that, might feel they've run into the same problem.
Yeah. Isn't it fascinating how after the fact you can look back and see like, oh, like here's this whole like timeline. And of course you don't know when you're in it back there what the
Sure.
future holds, but then you can look back on it and say, oh, I needed to learn these things. I needed this to prepare myself for this, to prepare myself for this.
And that's the gap in the process. The psychology, psychiatry field doesn't teach people that. And that's what I've discovered is, here's what all of that means. Here's what here's what's actually happening.
Yeah.
And so people, whatever age they're at, they can easily identify, okay, these are adaptations. I'm not living in my authentic self. Doesn't mean I'm bad, all of us are detached from our authentic selves. It's what happens to all of us in childhood. Like, it's a human dynamic. What is normal is that we're all perfectly imperfect, dysfunctional, and suffering from childhood trauma. The myth that somehow some people, skip all that is just severe, just really grossly severe lack of education and understanding. And that's what I'm trying to get across to people is, we're only 50 years into really dealing with true psychology, family dynamics, relationships. And it really started with the advent of Oprah, Phil Donahue, the TV talk shows, because up until that point, the first psychology book wasn't written until the 1870s. Then you have Freud and Jung, some others in the 1920s. But it wasn't until the 1970s where society went, oh, we might want to look at parenting. We might want to look at this. So I equate that, as far as our emotional development, and what people don't realize is there's another gap in the process, is everybody's teaching to change your thoughts. Every single thought, every single action you ever take starts with an emotion. So if emotional authenticity isn't at the forefront of your recovery, that's why you're not recovering, because everything's an emotional process. And so the equivalent is that, as a species, we haven't even discovered that the earth isn't flat. We don't know how to build tools or fire. We're that undereducated and underdeveloped emotionally. And that's why we're all struggling so much, is we're only 50 years into it after being on this planet for thousands of years. And so again, You can't be blamed for doing things you didn't know. You do the best you can with the information you have at the time. And for people listening to me today, if they haven't heard a lot of this stuff, what I try and get across to them is today is the first day in your life you ever had a choice, because you never knew this. So you're not to blame for anything that happened, what you did to others or yourself. You are responsible for the consequences of not having that information. You can't wipe that away. Yet you're not to blame. You're not bad. Now you do have a choice as of today. You can choose to learn new stuff. If you choose not to, I don't know if you blame yourself, but at least you can look back and go, well, that was my first opportunity. Like, in a sense, today is the first day you were born. And so, at least give yourself grace, or you just did the best you could. And society and the world hasn't taught you what you need to know. And that's not your fault.
Yeah, yeah. Really important. So you mentioned two things I want to delve a little deeper into.
Sure.
You mentioned the worst day cycle.
Yeah.
Tell us what that, can you describe what that is? Tell us more about that.
Well, really, it's a resolution to repetition compulsion, which Freud and Genet and others kind of postulated, back in the early mid-1900s, but they can never really conclude exactly what it is. And I feel like I have, and it really, it encompasses four things: trauma, fear, shame, and denial. And to me, the missing pieces I've put together are the shame and denial aspects of shame is actually a power dynamic. And so there are two things that happen to us as a child when we experience trauma. The first thing is this: as a child, we need two things. We need attachment. We will die if we don't physically and emotionally attach to another human being. The other thing we need is the pursuit of our authentic self, which is our morals and values, needs and wants, negotiables and non-negotiables, our inherent power. Well, think of what childhood is. Parents strip us of that, and so we have a choice. I'm either going to give up my authentic self, or I'm going to give up attachment. Well, I'll die without attachment, so I'm going to drop this. So that's where we lose our authentic power. Well, once we become an adult, so that trauma happens, it creates an emotional chemical addiction of fear. And so our brain and body actually gets conditioned to that. And our brain does not know right from wrong. It only knows known from unknown. So if we've known an experience, I could put a person in a room with 20, if they ended up with a narcissist, that it didn't just happen by accident. Their childhood trained them for that. I could put them in a room with 20,000 people and only one narcissist. All whatever they say are attractive, they'd come out and go, oh, they're all great in this, but there's something about this one. Their brain would actually seek that person out. That's the emotional chemical addiction that happens in childhood. And that flips into stage 3, which is shame. This is how we get our power back. This is tough for people to hear. This will feel assaultive, but we actually choose these people. We re-victimize ourselves. It's a subconscious choice to relive the pain against ourselves because we actually chose it. As a child, we had no choice. It happened to us, but the reconciliation that we're attempting is to choose it. And the reason we choose it is the more we relive that pain, we confront our denial, because in childhood, we have to deny the truth. We have to immediately deny our parents' perfect imperfections. We condone, justify, repress, suppress, all of these things. That's why most people, oh, my childhood was fine, because they've gone into massive denial. And so what happens is people relive that pain because they're getting something from it. Because think of it, whenever we're victimized, what happens? You post on Facebook and you have 500 people going, oh my God, you poor thing. We get to stay the child. We get love and care. We get all this support, but we don't have to be responsible for it. Everyone's going to fix it for us. Like, it has these tremendous payoffs for us. Now, we aren't choosing, some choose it consciously, most don't. But eventually the pain of those consequences, those payoffs don't work anymore. And that denial finally breaks down. And that's what, now we're into truth. Oh my God, I've been setting myself up like I did with my marriages and careers. Like, those women, I adore them. They saved my life, but only because I discovered the worst day cycle, and then what I call the authentic self cycle, which, is the reconciliation of that. And so until you know that process, and until you see how you're stuck in that, you'll just relive your pain against yourself. And no one's immune from that. You could pick whoever you think is the most normal person on this planet, the most successful, and in 3 questions, I could blow up their life and go, oh, do you see? You're just reliving. I mean, your career tells me your childhood trauma. Real estate agents, there was chaos in the home. They were army brats, moved a lot. Like, they're just reliving the chaos. People in finance, money issues, like, it's all correlates. And my ghostwriter, when I wrote my first book, she goes, what about ghostwriters? I'm like, you really want to know? And I'm like, think of what you do. She's like, what? I'm like, well, what do you write? She goes, stories. And I said, yeah, whose story? Other people's. And I said, who's writing your story? She was never allowed to have her own morals and values, needs and wants, negotiables and non-negotiables. She could never live her life story. So she writes everybody else's. And so, like, people just aren't, and that's what I mean is we just don't teach this stuff. So people don't know. But once you learn about the cycle, I don't care what age you are, you can see yourself where you are on that. And if you want to begin the process of reattaching to yourself.
Yeah. Wow. Thanks for laying it down, Kenny, because we need to hear it. And it's not easy. It's not an easy truth to accept, but everything you just shared, I was like, yep, 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 yep. And for me, my life didn't start to change until I got out of denial and started really seeing how my choices were playing out my past and what I needed to learn from it. So I appreciate so much you sharing that, and the way that you shared it is just really really hit me. And
that's the thing, in my opinion, this biggest gap in all of recovery programs, psychology, whatever, is the single greatest epidemic, pandemic, virus, illness on the planet today is denial and self-deception. And Byron Katie teaches a form of it, but nobody's teaching or talking about it. And that's my skill set. Until you learn the processes I teach in my second book about how to confront your denial, you're, pardon me, SOL. And that's the secret, is being able to see how you're in self-deception. And, so for those who felt attacked when I brought up, you chose the narcissist, that's your deception. Well, if you learn the things I teach, you go, oh, like, you just see it and you go, oh my God, I get it now. And that's when your life changes.
yeah,
That's when everything starts to fall into place. That's the secret. It's confrontive, but here's what happens when you do it. You're immediately hit with this, like, assault of darkness, of pain. And right after it, like, every time I walk a client into it, you see their eyes like deer in the headlights. I see them experience that deep, shame. And then immediately they smile. It just lifts it. Like, when it happened to me, I was out for a walk and I buckled while I was walking because I got hit with that darkness. And then I just got flooded with light and just went, oh my God, that's it. Like, it changes everything. And all of a sudden, people calling you out, you're like, yeah, I am that. That's right. Yeah, thanks for seeing me. Instead of getting defensive, it's just total freedom. And that's the big secret, is become an expert in your self-deception and denial. And that's one of the main things it's one of the main processes I brought that I feel it has really helped people.
yeah, yeah. So powerful. So I want to just, like, get into a little bit more about emotional authenticity. So,
Sure.
so for somebody just hearing, people may hear these kinds of terms, but they may not really understand what it means. So what does emotional authenticity mean, and how can it help with healing from growing up with narcissistic abuse?
Sure. I'll use a metaphor so people understand it. And first of all, I want to make sure people understand that I wouldn't have a career if it weren't for the people who coined the term emotional intelligence. they made it socially acceptable to talk about emotions. But emotional intelligence does not give you emotional intelligence. It doesn't give you any emotional abilities. And here's the way I like to describe the difference between that and emotional authenticity. Have you ever built a puzzle?
I put together a puzzle.
Sure.
Yeah.
What's the first thing you start with?
The outline,
Yeah, why is that?
the edges, because you can see those first.
Yeah, it's simple, doesn't require much effort, but does that, if you just built the edges of if this were a puzzle and you just built the edges, because what happens once you build the edges? Don't you usually do what?
Well, then you start looking for other patterns, I think.
But you quit, right? Because it's like,
Well, it gets harder for sure.
yeah, it gets harder and you get frustrated, and then it's like, well, let's go get something to eat instead. Like,
Lots of
well,
breaks.
yeah, emotional intelligence gives you the border. Emotional authenticity gives you a process that's like putting the pieces of the border together so you can complete the picture. That's the difference between them. And it starts, see, like emotional intelligence doesn't even tell you. First of all, their whole process is built off a design of the brain, which was disproven before the book was ever written. All right, the old triune brain model, that's not how the brain works. And again, it was disproven before they ever wrote the books. The other thing is they lightly suggest that when you have an emotional reaction, maybe it's something your sister said when you're a kid. Well, every single emotion you ever have, no matter what age you are, all you're ever doing is reliving an emotion that you learned in childhood. We're not born with emotions. We learn them. We develop what are called simulations, concepts, and definitions. And so whether you're happy or sad as an adult, you're not present in that moment. You're reliving a childhood emotion that you lived in, that you experienced in the past. And so depending on the simulation, concept, and definition, you're stuck reliving the trauma. And so you have to learn the process. Well, again, emotional intelligence doesn't teach you this, that it's very simple. And this is the beginning steps of learning emotional authenticity is 3 simple questions. What am I feeling? I have a free feelings wheel you can download on my website. And so most people, because 70% of the population is detached from their emotions, they start in the beginning, which is bad, angry, sad, happy, but as you get further on the wheel, they get more intricate and more defined. And as you get better at it, you'll need a thesaurus because there are thousands of emotional words, but most people start in the beginning. So here's an example. Let's see if I can do this. I'll tell you the story. I was driving my car, and this helped me discover how denial works too. And I was stuck behind a guy who wouldn't turn left. We're in the left-hand turn lane, and he wouldn't turn. And I'm screaming and yelling at him because he should have turned. And I know that my judgment, blame, and criticism about him and his driving is about me in an area of myself I haven't reconciled. So I ask myself, what am I feeling? I'm feeling angry, powerless, invisible, ignored, neglected. And then I asked, okay, of all those feelings, which one is the most powerful? Powerless. Okay. Question number 2 is, where in my body am I feeling it? Well, for me, that's almost always in my stomach. What's my first memory of having this feeling? Well, that's very simple. The day I opened up the door to my mom and found her naked on the toilet. So in that moment, because I can't change him, and because I couldn't change my mom, I'm reliving the trauma from my childhood. Emotional intelligence doesn't even get you anywhere close to that understanding. And so if you don't know that when you're upset with your partner and 2 people are fighting, that you're both projecting pain from the past onto each other, that you're not even seeing your partner's face. And so when emotional intelligence talks about, relationship intelligence, you don't have it because they're not giving you the skills and tools. Now, there are many other tools to it. I have a whole university classes, written 2 books, like I can't give you all of it, but that's just a little snippet to give, hopefully, the viewers an idea of, wow, that's different. And I can see how, yeah, all I have to do is those 3 questions and I can see immediately. Now, here's for some people go, yeah, but I don't remember my trauma as a childhood. That's fine. You don't need to. Every person will remember a certain age. God, yeah, I feel like I was about 3 or 5 years old, 8 years old. I don't know what happened, but something I feel as about that age. That's good enough. If you're meant to recall the memory, you will. You don't have to. But that's the beginning process to start developing true emotional intelligence, and how all of your so-called thoughts, beliefs, and actions are not thought-based, because that's not even how our brain works. Every bit of information we ever take in, whether we see it, touch it, smell it, taste it, it goes into the emotional center of our brain. It pulls on past emotional experiences. We feel something, it then triggers the thought, the simulation concept, and the definition, which are the words, and that's what gets you thinking. So if you can't sleep at night, all of these things, you're just processing big time pain from the past. And until you know the process to find it, and that's why people aren't sleeping pills, depression, all of these things, is we don't teach, wait a minute, all of that is a result of unhealed pain in the past, and without emotional authenticity, you're destined to, stay stuck on medication or detach from yourself.
Wow. Wow. Those were some really poignant questions, and I'm so happy that you shared them, because now people can, start checking in with themselves and asking.
There's a lot more to it, but that at least opens the door for people to very simply get an awareness and go, oh my God, he's right. And just do a simple thing. Just as you walk around the house. Like I wrote about this in my second book. I was trying to write and I was all angry. I'm like, what's going on? And I just stopped. And I went, okay, wait a minute. What have I just done? Well, I just gone downstairs and made a cup of coffee. And so I retraced that whole process. So I went, wait a minute. I was standing there waiting for the coffee. My feet were cold. Yeah, that ticked me off, because when I was a kid, I'd made myself sick and hurt because my mom would stay sober if I was sick or hurt. And so my fevers would run so high, she'd have to give me ice baths. So in that moment, waiting for the coffee, I'm ticked off because I'm feeling the coldness of the tile. See, like this is what people don't realize. All of a sudden you're angry, you think it's a thought. No, it's because of what your feet are, the information coming in from your feet. Well, then I walked over and grabbed a handful of popcorn, stuffed it in my mouth. Well, I've been trying to lose weight. Now I'm feeling guilty and shame. And then that triggered a memory of how my mom yelled at me for reaching in and getting cottage cheese out of the refrigerator. That now I was a bad kid because I was hungry. And that and the reason she yelled at me is she used the cottage cheese to feed the kids, or feed the dogs, to give the dogs their pills. And so I spent 30 years starving myself, telling people I didn't like eating. It bored me. But the solution I came up with as a child is I'll starve myself so that, one, mom doesn't get mad at me. Two, mom loves me. And oh, by the way, we feed the dogs before the kids in this family. And so I'm reliving that. I turn the corner, a loud car goes by, honks its horn. Well, then that triggered, my dad had a booming voice. And whenever I was in trouble, he just screamed, Kenneth. And my older brother used to scream in my ear when I was asleep. So loud noises freaked me out. Well, like I'm just making a cup of coffee and I'm reliving all this trauma. Well, no wonder I can't type anything but anger. And so, then I used the recovery process, got myself out of reliving the past, create, the new simulation and concepts and definitions I've developed for those events. And basically all I had to do was write out everything that had just happened to me. And boom, that's what I wanted. The message I wanted to get across to people is this is how simple it works. And I couldn't find the answer. And that's another thing. The reason I was angry that I couldn't find the answer is that goes back to asking my dad for help with homework. And he was an engineer. And once math turned from basic numbers to theory, I didn't get it. And then he would get so dismissive and shaming that I didn't get it. And so I'm reliving that. I can't find the answer. I can't type what I want to say. And so those 4 childhood events are the whole reason I'm in this place. Well, people don't even realize that's how they're running their life all day, every day. All you're ever doing, Julie and James pointed that out, 95 to 99% of our adult life, we're just reliving our childhood. We're in our subconscious. Well, that's how it works. And emotional intelligence doesn't tell you that or teach you that or give you a process to find it and then rework it. And that's why, you know, again, I found, you know, I started all this because of all the gaps. Everything is superficial, fluff, Band-Aid. It's the outer edge of the puzzle. But if you want to turn your life around and you don't want to take your life like where I was, you need the middle, the tough stuff. And that's the niche I'm trying to fill.
Yeah, yeah. Wow. And you're absolutely right. I mean, everything, yeah, everything that you said, I'm like, yep, 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 yep. I totally agree with you. And so, you know, it is, and I appreciate you also talking about like that moment when in the last question, that kind of that breakthrough moment when you see what you didn't see before.
Yeah.
And so I know for me, a lot of my resistance to doing this deep inner work was fear-based. Like I was really afraid of what I would find about myself, and I didn't know how to do it, and I didn't know who could help me. What would you like to tell people who are watching this interview? How can they overcome their fear of addressing childhood trauma?
It's a great question. And it is scary, but remember why our brain goes into fear. What scares our brain is anything it doesn't know, anything it hasn't lived. And so that fear is a lie. Your brain has created a simulation category and definition that says, if I haven't done this, it's going to be bad for me. And that's a lie. It's not truth. And so that, you know, those are just words. They don't mean anything because remember what drives us to action is an emotion. So here's something they can do to try and bridge that gap. And so what I'd suggest is people listening, if you're in that place and you're like, I don't want to deal with any of this, everything you just said. Okay, ask yourself, who would I be? And what would I think and feel if I never had that thought again? If I never felt the fear of dealing with trauma, if I never felt the fear of changing, if I never felt the fear of what's going to happen and what am I going to learn and am I going to be able to handle it? What if all of those thoughts and feelings you could never feel, they were swept away? What's left over? What do you feel in this moment right now? Well, every time I ask a client that, what they always say is lighter, free, safe, open, excited. Well, that's your first glimpse into your authentic self without your worst day cycle. That's truth. We never, no matter how much pain and trauma we go through, we never lose our inherent value and worth. And for those of you who just went through that process, you just got a taste of what it's like to experience your authentic self and your inherent value and worth. And you will always have that. And that's what you will find every time you do the work, a deeper connection to that, because you'll create a new simulation category and definition that, wait a minute, that is a lie. Because when I do this, oh my God, I get more of this. But at least now, for those of you who, if you were, you know, pushed away all those thoughts and feelings, now you know what it feels like. And that's what we need, is we need to shift, we need something to shift the way we feel to bridge that gap. Well, there's a little taste. You know, I have a lot of other processes that help people create new simulation categories and definitions, but that's just a simple one for, you know, this format.
Wonderful, wonderful. Whew, so much goodness you've shared with us today, Kenny. So you've got more to share.
Yeah.
You've got a free gift to offer our viewers. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. Actually, I have tons of free gifts on my website, tons of free downloads, lots of things. But the one today that, you know, we're focusing on is if you go to my website, kennyweiss.net, and you head over to the coaching tab, you'll see that I give away the introductory class to my emotional authenticity method, which gives you, you know, this basic understanding of how to start creating new simulations, concepts, and definitions for your emotions. And so, you know, you can use that, you know, there are workbooks. It's a series of videos and workbooks that start getting you to see how your life is still run by your childhood and your emotions and the beginning process to really create that awareness and start turning things around. And so it's called, I think it's the complete emotional authenticity method, or I get them mixed up. I get mixed the full set of classes, or no, it's your journey to emotional authenticity, I think is the name of the free class. The full set of classes is the complete emotional authenticity method. So but that's what you're looking for, is your journey to emotional authenticity. That's the free class that you can sign up for today.
Oh, wow. That's so generous of you, Kenny. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah. So I want to encourage all of our viewers to click on the link. We're going to provide the link to that free gift. So make sure that you get that and, start learning about this, because there's lots and lots of layers, and, Kenny, he's an expert in this field. So I just want to encourage everybody to take advantage of this opportunity. And Kenny, I want to thank you really from the bottom of my heart for being here today and for sharing your experience, your expertise, and your wisdom with our viewers and myself.
Yeah, well, I appreciate the opportunity to share my perfect imperfections, and hopefully some people realize, they listen to it and go, yeah, maybe I want to check that out. Maybe that might be something that would help me. I hope they do.
Yeah. Well, I know it will help them.
Yeah.
I know it will, because I like you mentioned, when you can connect with what's on the other side, when you really give the gift to yourself to heal and to recover from childhood trauma, it's life changing.
Yeah. It's the only, there's kind of, well, it's one thing, but people call it kind of two different names, either powerless, people want to feel empowered, two things people need the most is certainty or empowerment, which are kind of the same thing.
Mhm.
And learning about all this stuff is the only time I was ever able to feel certain and empowered. And what that means is, it's not that I don't ever feel uncertain or powerless. It means that when those moments happen, I know exactly what to do. I know what caused it. And even many times, I don't need it to change. It's okay. Like that's everyone's always, I just wanted to stop feeling bad. Well, the secret to recovery is learning how to be okay when everything's not okay, and not needing it to be okay. Just, it's part of life. Life is hard and we're limited. We're human. We can't solve everything. And yeah, I'm really powerless and uncertain, and I'm in a lot of pain today. And in a great, like now I can live in both. Emotions it's everyone tries to live just on this side of the spectrum of always happy and good, which is such a wasted life. You're leaving out the other half. And so all the solutions to life come in these dark, painful emotions. And if you don't know how to navigate those, then all you'll ever experience is those. You
Right.
won't get these. The only way to get these is to become an expert in these. And so being able to live in the full spectrum emotions, that's a full life. And that's what all of, learning how to do this, that's what allowed me to, get rid of the chaos and bring in the calm. And I've seen it happen for anyone that's chosen to, pursue the process.